Hello and welcome to Tag1 Team Talks, the vlog and podcast of Tag1 Consulting. We're commemorating the 20th anniversary of Drupal with an interview series featuring community leaders talking about their Drupal experiences. I'm really excited to have Jody Hamilton on the show today. Prior to joining Renaissance Electronics, a large semiconductor manufacturer, as their Senior Digital Business Analyst, Jody was the CTO and co-owner of Zibtech, a really well-known Drupal agency that she ran for around 13 years. I'm Michael Myers, the Managing Director at Tag1. Tag1 is the #2 all-time contributor to Drupal. We build large-scale applications for Fortune 500s and large organizations in pretty much every industry and sector using Drupal, as well as many other technologies. We're also one of the few official providers of Drupal 7 extended support. So if you'd like to continue running Drupal 7 after end of life, please contact us. We're happy to help you make that happen. Please join me in welcoming Jody. Jody, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thanks.
Awesome. I mean, Jody, there's so much to talk about, but I thought we would talk a little bit about your background and your work in the Drupal community, and then shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about Drupal as a product and where you see Drupal going in the future. Awesome. This is it was really fascinating to me. You started as a chemist, which and then you moved into web development. You started Zibtech in around 2008, I believe, with Alex Yue, who's one of the more outspoken members of the community. And Zibtech became a really well-known agency that was very active in the community. So I'm curious, how did you go from chemistry and being a chemist to getting into web development to starting your own agency?
So I was a terrible chemist. I got into chemistry as just like the path of least resistance. I went to Harvey Mudd College, and you could only have, a science or engineering major. And chemistry seemed to be the easiest because they closed the lab at 5, and then that was the end of your day, whereas computer science, people are staying up all night drinking Mountain Dew. So I thought chemistry seemed like, easy. And I'm from Philadelphia, which is a big pharmaceutical hub, especially New Jersey. So I knew that there would be work. Whereas if I did like a physics major or something, I didn't know if I would have a job. So kind of just ended up in chemistry, hated it. I was a math teacher for a year, ended up back in chemistry. And then I was also a musician. I had a band, and I hated being a chemist, and I just dreamed of like a way out of this career. Our company actually closed down, and we all got severance and unemployment, which was I knew that was my chance. So I considered 2 options. I thought maybe I could become like an ecstasy producer. Because with my chemistry background, I thought that'd be like a good way to make money. I wouldn't have to go back to school, or maybe I could get into like websites. And I'd like made websites for my band and for myself, and I was pretty good at it. It seemed like a good combination of like creative and technical for me. And so I was talking to people in the music scene about these ideas, and they were like, Jody, like, you're a terrible criminal. You're already telling everyone about this idea. Like, you have a huge mouth, you're a terrible idea. Like, do the website thing. And they told me that this guy that was recording an album for me, he told me he worked with this other musician who had his own web agency, and maybe he would be looking for like an intern. So I emailed this guy out of the blue and said, I think I would be a great intern to like learn how to become a web developer as just an unpaid intern. I wondered if you were looking for an intern. And he said, because I was able to be an intern because I got the unemployment and everything. And he said, oh, I just got this big job doing a site for this guy, Stephen Colbert, who just got his show. I just got a show on Comedy Central, and I was actually just going to look for an intern. So this is like amazing timing, come on down. And I'm like, okay. Then after that phone call, I look up, and in my desk where I'm sitting as a chemist in the lab, it had like a newspaper cut out. Our band had been like in the Philadelphia Inquirer for being part of this compilation album. And there's a picture of my band, and there was another band that was also in the album that was also had a picture that I had taped up at my desk for like over a year. And I realized it was him. It was my new boss who I had just reached out to. It was his picture that was like looking at me at my desk this whole time. And his name was Mason Wendell. And he took me as an intern, taught me, pointed me in the right direction, taught me PHP, CSS, MySQL, everything I needed to know. And then he told me he had like his own CMS, and I was like doing the back end of that for him. And he told me he got a job where we needed like more user roles. It was going to be too complicated for our CMS, and he'd heard about this Drupal system, and could I check it out for this project? So I checked it out for him, and that was it. I just like, oh, he also told me I should listen to this Lullabot podcast. I listened to this Lullabot podcast. I heard Angie on there. She said her advice was to learn Drupal and open a bank account. And I was like, sounds good, Angie. That's what I'm gonna do. So that's what I did. And I just like obsessively learned everything I could about Drupal and PHP and CSS and MySQL and all that, until my unemployment and everything ran out. And then by that time I kind of looked up and was like, whoa, I'm actually pretty good at this. So
that's pretty amazing. Angie always gives good advice. So how did you go for, you were working for Mason as an intern, unemployment runs out. How do you get from there to ZimTech?
So Mason, over time, started paying me a bit. And then I also started doing freelance work. Drupal was so in demand then. That was like 2006 or so. It was so in demand, like you could just find jobs on Craigslist, or even on like Drupal.org had like paid gigs, or people would post like some bug that they had and like a bug bounty. And they'd be like, oh, I'll pay you $500 if you can fix this bug. I'd be like, okay, done. Like, it was easy. There was so much demand back then. So I started making money, doing my own projects. I worked for another agency, like as a contractor as well. And then I started thinking, and I was starting to do like core contributions and writing blog posts about Drupal. And I'm thinking like, I'm great at Drupal. I'm some great Drupal talent. People, I should go work for one of these like top Drupal shops. And some of the top shops back then were like Rain City. Didn't last that much longer after that. But I thought, I'm gonna move to Vancouver and work for Rain City, this will be great. But then I kind of realized like, nobody knew who I was. I was just like this girl with like no experience, no CS degree, didn't even look like a developer. And so I felt like, well, they're gonna give me like some entry-level job. Like I think I'm great. They don't think they don't know who I am. So I thought, the market kind of undervalued me. So I met this guy, Alex UA in Philly, and he sort of had like the opposite problem as me. Like we were both working as freelancers. He had way too much work and had no idea how to do it. I hated doing sales and was great at doing the work. So we just met kind of at the Drupal meetup, and we thought, let's just make a company, and it'll be easy for us to become like the dominant company in Philadelphia, since there is no one else really vying for that yet. If we come in now and try to do it now, and then we'll be able to try to attract the best talent in the area. And we ended up a couple of years later, my buddy Mason, who had taught me, he ended up coming on as our creative director for a few years as well. So he got back in the mix too.
It's a pretty amazing small world. I think that's really great advice. I think the market undervalued me. So I went out and I started a company, and it really served you well. Running an agency or any business can be really challenging. and there's a lot of co-opetition in the Drupal community, and there's a lot of really great, organizations. You mentioned Lullabot. Were there shops that inspired you when forming ZivTech, that running ZivTech?
Yeah. So we were always, Alex and I were always good friends with Chapter 3, and who are the owners now, running Pantheon. So we were very close with them. So we knew a lot about kind of how they ran Chapter 3. So that was like one company that we followed. And then at that time in like 2008, 2009, the biggest, like kind of hottest, like Drupal shop was Development Seed. And so and they were based in DC. And so their kind of like biggest moment, I felt, was like the DrupalCon DC in 2009. And they were really inspiring for us. That was kind of like our first coming out as ZivTech. We brought our whole team down to DC and went to all the talks by Development Seed and followed like what they were up to. And one of the things with them was, they were always trying to kind of get out of client work. I felt like, they were always trying to like build products, which they ended up leaving the Drupal community and becoming the what's it called? Sorry.
Mapbox.
Mapbox.
Yeah.
Although Development Seed actually does still exist.
Get out of here.
Yeah, no, they still exist. They don't do Drupal. But they still exist, and all their blog posts are still online. You can still read all of their Drupal blog posts from 2008, 2009. They like really inspired us in terms of like all the different tools that they were trying to make. Although some of the tools that they made back then like ended up kind of becoming like semi-abandoned when they left the community. So like some of the things that they really worked on a lot were like, features and strong arm and context, so many different tools. And, those tools just kind of like stagnated a little bit after they left, but they were also the only tools. That team was just so ahead of everyone else and so ahead of their time. So it's just kind of funny how, for like the next like almost 10 years, everyone in Drupal like used strong arm version 2. That was just this like kind of half-baked idea. And they weren't even trying to like really do configuration management the way everyone else does. They were trying to build distributions. That's why they were building those tools. And then all of a sudden we got into this horrible place for like 10 years in Drupal where we had like features and strong arm, and your clients would say to you, so how do you export the configuration? And you would say, well, you have to understand some types of configuration are CTools exportables and some are not. So first you have to know which ones are and which ones aren't, because they will behave differently. And it was a tough period of time.
Yeah, Drupal, certainly had its rough spots, early in the early days. DevSeat was punching way above their weight. Like you said, way ahead of their time. They did Open Atrium, right? Was that them too?
Yeah, that was like Open Atrium and another distribution. Those were like some of the distributions that they were working on. They kind of seemed like they had this idea that they would make these distributions and then they wouldn't have to like do all of these one-off client projects, and they would have this steady income, which was always kind of like a nice dream. Not sure if that ever worked out for anyone, but
yeah, I think the community as a whole has really struggled to productize distributions. I think that doesn't mean that they aren't valuable. Acquia's Lightning, as a jumpstart framework, and not reinventing the wheel. I mean, I think they were definitely on to something. It certainly streamlined their business. Made them more profitable, perhaps, but was really challenging to productize. And it is really interesting. They had a lot of ideas. They moved fast. They put a lot out there, and then they exited stage left, and everybody was just like, "What?
Whoa, what just happened?" It took us a long time to like process everything they had just done. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
And
Eric
so
understands.
the team I'm working with now still uses context.
Wow.
And I just remember in like a DrupalCon DC, how they introduced context, and they said it's an abstract system where you, depending on the context, you can have a condition and then a reaction. There's all types of conditions, and the reaction could be anything, any type of reaction in the world. But of course, it's just a system that people use to place blocks onto different regions of the page. But that's not how they had envisioned it, you know?
Yeah. And then, yeah, Mapbox went on to be, it's $1 billion company now, which is crazy. So they've done really well for themselves, and they finally found that productization fit.
And like the backstory of that team was like that supposedly they didn't even have like a technical background. They were a bunch of people that were friends hanging out at a local bar. And then they magically morphed into this like amazing team. It was really interesting.
A lot of really smart people.
Yeah, and it really inspired me, because it's kind of like, to me, everything's really about the talent of the individual people and how well they work together. Whereas sometimes in tech, people forget that or don't realize that it's a talent-based industry, which I think is way off.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So it's crazy. You went from chemistry to code. You ran ZivTech for 13 plus years, and you recently made another set of really big changes. So you are not risk averse, and that's exciting. So you went from, being the CTO at a digital agency. Now you're working at Renaissance, which is a very large semiconductor manufacturer. What precipitated wanting to move from the technical side to, and an agency where you have clients, to being a client and then working on the business side? I mean, that's a lot of shift.
Yeah, well, I think, for one thing, the whole time that I was working as a vendor, I'm observing my clients and I'm thinking to myself, they seem to have a pretty good job. I mean, I'm sitting here, killing myself. I work on a timer, I'm living on a timer for over 10 years. I'm pressing a timer for every task that I'm doing. I'm jumping from project to project. If they don't like what I've accomplished, they just maybe won't pay me at all, and I just will have no income whatsoever. No matter what happens in the project, they're just getting a paycheck this whole entire time, right? It's not really any skin off of their back personally, right? Meanwhile, they're treated like royalty. We're rolling the red carpet out for them. We're saying, anything that comes out of their mouth, great idea, Fred. I love that idea, and I was realizing, and we don't really get a lot. Some clients were great, but a lot of them, they don't give you a lot of thanks. They think that paying you is the thanks that you get. And, as the owner, I'm the last to get paid. So it really wasn't much thanks. Sometimes there were years where I didn't get paid at all running a business. So when they didn't, thank me either, it wasn't great. I'm a sensitive person. So now but I thought to myself, it can't be that, being a client is that much better. It's probably just grass is greener on the other side. No, I think it is. It really is that much better. And now that I'm like working in-house, when I go to a meeting and I say something, people go, "That's a great idea, Jody." I'm like, "Thank you. Isn't it a great idea?" Because I've been saying great ideas this whole time. No one ever said that before. And they say, "Oh, how's it going? Do you want to be on my podcast?" It's just, people treat you a lot better. When you're a vendor, it's like, which is better, being a diner or being a waitress? I mean, yeah, probably being a diner. So I thought, this could be me. Like, the other frustration that I had was, the clients come and they already come to you with an idea of what they want to do. And sometimes they just kind of treat you like you're just a set of hands. And as like a technical person, some people think of you as a resource. And it can be hard to, as I got better and better at what I did, I was really an expert in strategy and web applications in general. not just how to implement them, but what your strategy should be in the first place. And so when people would come and say, this is what we want you to do, and they didn't really care if I didn't think it was a good idea or not. I didn't really like doing work that I didn't think had a lot of value, whether they were going to pay me for it or not. And I didn't like that sometimes it felt like I didn't really have a seat at that table. So I found that, so I started to realize that although I felt that writing code made me really strong as a strategist and more of like a product owner, that a lot of people saw it more as, if you write code, you're like a resource. You're just a coder. You're just a technical person. I don't know why they look at it that way, but a lot of people do. And as long as I kept on wearing that coder hat, it was going to keep me from the seat at the table that I wanted to have. So I felt like I kind of had to let go of that. I'm still like read code all day, but I don't write it. But yeah. Can't keep myself.
So now you're the client that reads the code and gives everybody shit.
No, well, I'll give you shit if it's bad, but if it's good, I will be the client that really appreciates you. Yeah, you won't be able to hide from me if it's bad. I'll be your worst nightmare. But if it's good, it'll be the client that actually like sees you and gets you, and does thank you.
I don't understand why people don't treat developers like gold. It blows my mind. They're amazing, and they're so hard to come across.
I don't know. I think my theory is that people who don't understand code are threatened by it to some extent, and so they have to come up with some way to like minimize other people by kind of calling them a technical resource and trying to make them less important in some way. I don't know. That's just my theory. So I'm also in an MBA program now, which is just mainly just to get that credential to help me to, have a seat at the right table. Yeah, it's the same type of thing. Like in the MBA program, there's no acknowledgement of the existence of talent, which to me, I think is what everything has always been about. It's always been about finding talent, working with talent, growing talent, the talent of individual people. And that's the business, that's the value, but that's not what they are interested in their little worldview that they're in. So
a company is nothing without its people. I think you're amazingly well positioned. You have this, this deep background as a CTO and running an agency and dealing with, all sorts of different organizations. You pair that with an MBA. I think you're going to get whatever seat you want at the table.
And also, I've aged into it. I think it's hard. It was hard for me, like as a woman in my 20s, to be taken seriously and have a seat at the table. Now that I'm in my 40s, I feel like I'm a little bit, it's easier. It's harder being a woman, and it's harder being young, and it just gets easier, I guess, over time.
It's pretty amazing. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about the community, but you just made me think, like when we started in the community, we were in our 20s. We were these kids running around with these great ideas, and 20 years later, Drupal's this thing that powers 3% of the internet and provides jobs for lots of people. What for you, what has been the best part of being part of the Drupal community for you?
Yeah, I think it's a professional community, but it's such a special one. It's hard as an adult to make new friends, but it's easy in the Drupal community. So I've definitely made lots of friends, and it's also hard to meet smart, interesting people in this world. And you go to like a Drupal community event, and that's how everyone is. So yeah, definitely like the friendships. One of my closest friends is Matt Cheney of Pantheon. And I met him at my first European DrupalCon, DrupalCon Szeged in Hungary. And we've had a great time every Drupal event since. I guess for me, being so busy running the business, and I'm sure for a lot of people, it kind of became like going to Drupal events was like my only vacation, even though you're like working the whole time. It was like, that's vacation, because if you had another vacation, it's probably just like with your family, and it's just kind of like a chore in some other way. So yeah, it just kind of became that was like our chance to like see our friends and go to all different places all around the world and go out to different bars and just talk to really interesting people. So, and even now, like, get to kind of still be in the Drupal community, still get to see people, even though, it's a pandemic, haven't really been to an event in a while. But, and also, the people that were our employees, I mean, I had many employees over the years, and the fact that like, there is this sense of community of just like, you can quit ZivTech and, we're still friends and we can still see each other at events and still be part of this community together. So it's really nice that the community and the friendships come first and over the business relationships.
I love the early DrupalCons. They were a lot of fun. The fact that they're now in more fixed locations, they're a bit more business events. They don't, to me, they're good for business, but they don't have the same, I remember, Szeged, we drank every bar in the town dry, literally. We took over the town, we had an amazing time. It was so much fun. And, you would talk about Drupal and you would make changes to the platform in these, now those are like code, maybe I haven't been to a dev days in a long time, but maybe it's shifted, but like us, the community kind of grew up and, things changed a lot. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, for me, going to these events, I got to see the world, go to so many countries, meet so many people, see countries through the eyes of people who live there, which is even better than just going,
Yeah.
And that,
but like, yeah, as sort of the life cycle of the Drupal software has matured, like, so have we. And like, we're not really, like, our life cycle is kind of going along like with the Drupal life cycle, because Drupal honestly doesn't really attract that many younger people anymore. It's the people that are in it are, a lot of them have been in it for a long time, and the growth is not there anymore. It's not like the cool thing that like people in their 20s are going to be like, yeah, let me learn this, behemoth of a system. So yeah, I mean, like, the kind of group is kind of aged together, I think.
Yeah, I like to think like fine wine, Jody. We've only gotten better.
Yeah.
I'm ready for a glass of wine.
Sure.
Do you remember your first contribution to the community? You guys were really engaged in the community, and that was really wonderful to see. I mean, it doesn't have to be your first. I don't know if you remember your first, but one of your earlier contributions.
No, I don't really remember my first. It was just like little patches and things, but some of like in the earlier days, some of the things that like I really enjoyed was times when I got to be invited to help define like a new initiative. Because I think that's a really good role for me, but not necessarily one that's that easy to get into. I tend to find like the kind of tedium of like pushing a patch through into finally getting committed like way too slow and painstaking of a process. But getting to kind of like come in with more of like an opinion of like how things should work from the beginning, I enjoy that a lot more. So a couple of the things that I got to work on in that aspect was media module, which we originally made for Drupal 6 with Aaron Winborn, who was a good friend. of Alex and mine. And I really enjoyed that one. And also Drupal Commerce with Ryan Sarama. They invited me to kind of like a few days like retreat where we like architected Drupal Commerce from UberCart. And I really enjoyed getting to do that a lot.
I love Ryan, and Drupal Commerce went on to have a huge future. I didn't realize that you had been a part of that. It's one of the things I love about talking to people about their contributions. You know, I learned so many things as to like who was involved in what and how things became what they were.
Mhm.
You mentioned that Drupal is this behemoth, and people give Drupal a hard time for its learning curve. I wonder if there's one thing that you learn the hard way about Drupal, and it is not necessarily code, but looking back, you're like, man, I really wish someone had told me before I had to go through this this process to learn this lesson.
Yeah, well, I guess it's more about not so much about Drupal, but about like developers and like who I am and how different people think. I've gradually learned over the years that most developers enjoy complexity. Like they just like it. They just like when things are super crazy and not all of them, and everyone's different, but a lot of them kind of fit this sort of similar profile that I never fit. And that was like, always kind of a source of confusion for me. But over the years, I've understood more who I am and what the strengths of it are. I hate complexity. So when people start talking about all this technical stuff and they want to go on and on and on and on about it, I'm just like, you're killing me. You're overwhelming me. I don't like any of this. And I realized over the years that not liking complexity is actually a superpower, because when you want things to be simple, that's how you make things that are actually good. And so early on, I would kind of doubt myself when people would have these like really technical, overwhelming conversations where they're going back and forth super fast, all this stuff. I would think to myself, I'm confused. I don't know what they're talking about. I'm totally overwhelmed. Doesn't seem right to me. I guess I'm just maybe not smart enough like them, so I'll just keep it to myself. I learned that's a big mistake, right? If I'm confused, everyone's going to be confused forever, right? So for example, when we came up with the media module architecture, there were all these conversations about how we're going to have a file entity and also a media entity or something. And there was some kind of logic about why we needed two new entities instead of one. And it confused the hell out of me. And I think it was a terrible decision to have both of those. It ended up confusing everyone and making everyone do tons of extra work forever. And whatever advantage it gave was certainly not worth, what it cost everyone with that extra complexity. And if I had, raised my hand and been like, no, like this is hurting my head and it's going to hurt everyone's head that ever has to use this system, we could have had a better system. Because actually it's a good thing to be confused. It's a valuable thing to be confused, because if you can say that you're confused, you can save thousands of other people from being confused by stopping it right there.
Yeah, no, I agree. You gotta speak up and share your confusion. For me, sometimes it helps to better understand it. Well, why the hell do they want that? Like maybe I will, and half the time I'm like, no, that really is not a good idea. Like it doesn't make any sense, and I'm not crazy, right? I'm not, not getting it. Like, this isn't how I would recommend you do it.
Yeah.
And I think that, to some degree, more people need to speak up. But I also think that's one of the challenges with Drupal is that, there are a lot of voices and, they're not, in my opinion, they shouldn't necessarily be, carrying equal weight.
Yeah.
And, it makes getting things done. I love the spirit of it, but it makes getting a lot of things done. You mentioned, this complexity, the file issue. do you have a least favorite or favorite aspect or feature of Drupal or the Drupal community?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had trouble in the open source community, really finding my place in it, especially because of, running a business, and my whole mindset has always been about just personal and financial survival. So I've never really felt like I have like a lot of time to make open source contributions that aren't paid for. Although, I enjoy it to some extent, but I also, my main challenge, I feel like, with the Drupal community was that, the beauty of it is it's a democracy and it's a chaos, and, anyone can do anything, and that's great. But the other side of it is in a lot of places, and this has gotten better over the years in some ways, but in general, there's no real leadership. And so, yeah, anyone can just come in and say anything and derail the conversation. And there's just a lot of, you can say, oh, let's just do this trivial fix and get this done. And then someone will say, oh, no, we can't do that because we have to do this thing and refactor this whole entire thing and then make a whole new version and then do that. And then we could do this fix. And I'm like, I don't have time for this. So I just kind of became someone who just had like a huge wallet of 100 patches, and half of them I had written myself. And I wasn't going to sit there and argue with people about whether or not they were going to get committed. I just took them with me from one project to another and had the platform the way I wanted it to be. But yeah, I think I wish that I had somehow more of like a leadership position somehow. But it wasn't that something that you could just sign up for, without putting in 1,000 hours of work to try to get there. So
sort of the inequity of open source, and really ties to that. I admire these, the core developers that have the fortitude to shepherd things through that, patch-based contribution process. It's really a labor of love.
Yeah,
it's pretty amazing what they're doing, and I'm with you. I don't think I could survive going through that process. The time, yeah.
I think we've all had, core patches that we tried to push forward for, 5 or 10 years for some trivial fix that, just could never, get done, and it's just, it pushes people away. They can't take it.
So more than anything, what do you think Drupal needs now?
I think at this point, we need to be realistic that, we're far in our life cycle. There's a lot of big organizations with big sites running Drupal, and they're going to continue to, unless we make it really difficult for them to continue that. This idea that we're going to continue to attract hobbyists who are just looking for a platform to make their website like Drupal did in 2006, I think that, that's past. I don't think why would anyone use Drupal instead of Squarespace or something to get started making some small website? And yeah, I think we need to just be, and I think we are, especially with the Drupal 9 being such a better, path forward, such an easy upgrade. I think we're definitely going in that direction. But yeah, I think we need to be real. We're a mature product used by large teams, and that's what we're going to be. We're not going to refactor the whole entire thing to be all completely in JavaScript. Let's get serious.
No, I did. I got to dig up the link. Someone sent me a Java clone of Drupal, where they basically rewrote Drupal in Java for to create an enterprise CMS. It's funny because I would agree with you. Drupal is very much a mature enterprise CMS, and and I love it on a lot of levels. I think back to the community that, we quote unquote grew up in and the things that we loved about it. I think in part that was because there were people from many different walks of life. And now that Drupal is this like really stable, large enterprise product used by really large teams, those non-for-profits, those, some educational institutions, like it's changing the dynamic and the makeup of the community a little bit.
Yeah, and that's been happening, the entire time that I've really, been involved, because, my first big DrupalCon was, DrupalCon Boston, and that's the DrupalCon where I talked to Alex and we decided to start ZipTech, and that was also like Acquia's big coming out. That's why it was in Boston. So like Acquia was coming out, and this whole idea of Drupal becoming more of an enterprise thing and less this tool of anarchists and nonprofits, that was, has been happening.
Drug dealers.
That's been happening, the entire time. But it is sad to think like, are we just going to become like an enterprise practice? Are we closing the door behind us? That's the door that we went in. But, times have changed that door. I mean, no one's looking for starting some small project on Drupal anymore. And I wish that Drupal would really reckon with that. It's been this constant friction point of like, are we a tool that's for people who can't code, who can just configure everything on their website by clicking around these complicated interfaces? Or are we a tool for professional teams like the one I'm working with that has, maybe 15 full-time developers working on this platform? Like, which are we? Because it's so confusing to be both. And these professional teams, they spend their time, and I did for many years, you spend your time clicking through these interfaces that are UI that you don't need because you're a developer. And then you have to export, that goes in a database, but you don't want it in a database because you have a whole workflow of deploying your changes that you need to have for quality. And then you have to export all of this into code, which is really where it should have been in the first place. And then you have to go through this whole process of like sending it through these environments and testing the deployment and hoping that nobody like changes the configuration on the live site that you didn't really want them to be able to change in the first place. It's silly. It's really silly, because it's really silly that we have to have a user interface for everything for a tool that's used by developers. So a choice needs to be made, and needed to be made a long time ago. But
I'd love to talk to you more about that. I have somewhat strong opinions on the topic, but we're running short on time. So I want to shift into our lightning round real quick. Whatever comes to mind first. I've got 4 questions that I want to get through in 4 minutes. Who are your Drupal mentors?
I never really had a mentor, but one person I've always admired is Jeff Eaton. I really like the way he started out as like a developer, but because we're a CMS, he found that, the real challenges were in the content strategy, and he moved in that direction. I love that he followed the complexity and the real challenges instead of like the sticking with some technical part.
I'm a big Eaton fanboy for sure. All right, favorite or least favorite Drupal module?
I would say views for both. I mean, obviously it's a great module, and Drupal would probably not be, what it is without it. But I think it's just crazy how so many teams use it. Like, it's like they can't even write a query without it. Like, if they want to display like one thing, they make a view, and it's you can just write a query. It ends up with, they have like 5 different hooks and 5 different templates trying to override what's coming out of views module. And then they have this completely like unmaintainable mess of code. It's like, you can actually write a custom query and, make a table yourself. It's fine to do that. It's okay.
I mean, Drupal wouldn't be what it is today without views, I'm sure. But you're talking about UIs for everything. The first UI for views was an atrocity.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's amazing. That says a lot for how powerful it was as a tool that people were able to make that work.
Yeah.
Best or favorite Drupal conference or Drupal camp that you've been to, and why?
Definitely Bad Camp. It's free. It's been until the past couple of years. It's been in Berkeley in October. It's a beautiful time of year. It's my friend Matt Cheney organizes it with lots of other great people. It's just always like just a good vibe, and it's not that businessy, but it's also like a big event. Just always a great time.
Hands down, my favorite Drupal camp. Couldn't agree more with everything that you said. Where do you go to learn more about Drupal?
My recommendation is read the code. And I'm sure my boss wishes I wouldn't. I still read code all the time, because I think the only answer to things is to understand them completely. You got to get to the bottom of things. That's how you become a good engineer. There's no like secret to it. It's just digging in, reading everything, understanding everything. Once you understand it all, then and there might be a lot of code, but it is like finite. And I think that's really how I became such a good Drupal developer. Was early on I was like, I think I will just sit here and read this module. And now I'm gonna, read this one, and now I'm an expert on it. And it doesn't necessarily take that long, but just get in there and read it.
Read the code.
There you go.
RTFC. All righty. So to wrap things up, I want you to pass the torch. Who should I interview next? Is there, someone that's had a lot of influence, over the success of Drupal? For you, who do you recommend that I reach out to?
I'll go with my friend Matt Cheney. Also Mike Pirock, another friend of mine. He develops Lando and does lots of other interesting things. Jeff Eaton, definitely. Ryan Zarama. I also really like Todd from Four Kitchens. He's a good one to talk to.
Yeah. That's a really great list, and I can't believe I haven't interviewed those folks yet. So I will definitely get them on the list and follow up. All amazing people that I'd love to talk to. Jody, my face hurts from smiling so much, from laughing. I really appreciate you joining us today. This is a lot of fun. I hope that our listeners enjoyed it, anywhere near as much as I did. I really appreciate your time. Really generous with it today. So thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. All righty. For our listeners, if you like this talk, please remember to upvote, subscribe, and share it out. You can check out all of our interviews in this series at tag1.com/20. That's 20. We actually also set up the 20 because I'm sure people are going to type it in. You can check out our past Tag1 Team Talks on the latest technology topics at tag1.com/talks. As always, we'd love your feedback. It is so gratifying to hear from you, topic suggestions. Tell us what you think. You can write to us at talks@tag1.com. That's tag1.com. Thanks again for tuning in. Take care.